So today we're going to make a small end table, and I want to keep it simple, and I think it should take a day or the equivalent of a day. And I've been working on some plans and I've got them all together, and I got myself a beautiful piece of cherry. So let's have some fun in the shop. This board is 12 inches wide and it's a little over 9 feet long. So I got tons of wood to work with here. It's been in my garage for probably almost a year, but let's verify the moisture content before we start cutting. This is your basic pin type moisture meter, so I got to get these pins deep into the wood. It's a timber check. I got it from Lee Valley a long time ago. I marked with the pins a spot here, and I'm just going to try to tap in a little deeper hole. This is right by the nut, so I'm not going to use this wood anyway, so it's a good place to drill into it. Let's jab it in, and then I just turn the knob until the light, oh, the light already comes on here. Oh, right there. The light was coming on at the 7% click of the dial. But I'll test in a few other spots as well. 7-8% here. This board is pretty dry. 8% here. And again, 8% down here. So I'm seeing numbers around 8%, so that's good. Now I'm quite fortunate in that this wood is measuring at just a hair over 1 1/8 in rough thickness. And that's great because I wanted to make legs for this table that are about 1 inch in thickness. And if this was your typical 3/4 inch stock, then the first thing I'd want to be doing is gluing up some wood blanks to make thicker legs. But don't have to do that, so that's some time saved there. And also then you don't have to worry about seams in your legs. The two biggest pieces are the top and the shelf. So I'm going to pick those out first. I want an 18-inch top and a 17-inch shelf. This is 10 inches wide, 7 inches wide. So I measured off 24 inches for the upper shelf, 22 inches for the lower shelf. This gives some wiggle room on each workpiece. And then using my circular saw, I cut off each section from the larger board. This knot really makes a wobble in the board right there, so I'm first going to cut this part off with the bandsaw before I move on to planing. So with that piece cut off, there's still a little bit of wobble here. So I have to be careful when I'm planing it, but it's a lot better than it was. So there's the top and the shelf. And I'm going to cut another 22-inch section off for the 4 legs that I need. And again, I'm looking for like 18-inch legs. I'm just cutting at 22, so I have a little bit of room to work with. And if you look closely at this board, you'll see there's straight grain here, and there's straight grain here, and there's sort of wilder grain in the middle. And I want fairly straight grain for the legs, so I'm going to take like 2 legs from this side, 2 legs from that, and then I will have this section in the middle for some other project. So I've roughed out the top and the shelf and the 4 legs. That leaves the 4 cross pieces. And I also kind of want straight grain for that. And let's take a closer look at this board. If you look along this board, again, there's sort of the wilder grain here, or the plain sawn. But along here, it's all fairly straight. So this is the rough edge. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a straight edge and draw a line along here. And then I'll run this through the bandsaw to establish a new straight edge, and then I'll be able to get the cross pieces from here. And then I ran the edge over the joiner a few times, and now I have a nice straight edge here that I can use as a starting point to cut out the cross pieces. And after that, I continued on the bandsaw, ripping out the 2 sections that I want for the legs. And so with that, all my roughing out is completed. I've got a piece for the top, a piece for the shelf. This will give us the 4 cross pieces, and this will give us the 4 legs. And this over here, this is all the scrap that's left from that 9.5 foot by 12-inch board. So there was enough for sure, but not that much extra. Now these shelf boards are way too big for my joiner, so I'm going to use a joiner sled, and I will joint them on my planer in order to bring them down to the finish thickness that I want. Some wedges and hot glue to hold them into position. Now it sits good and sturdy, so I can run this through until I have a flat top. And when it's done, I can pry it off and remove the hot glue and put this aside for a moment. Using my table saw as a reference surface, I can see that I have a nice flat face now on both these boards, so now I can just run these through the planer on the other side. We do need to crank the wheel down quite a bit after running that jig through. So that's gone really well so far. The boards were really fairly flat and very thick, so I've stopped at just about an inch of thickness. And I'm going to leave these two boards rest overnight just in case there's going to be any more movement. And I'm going to move on to the legs and the cross pieces. Those I will be first putting through the jointer and then through the planer. The legs in particular, I want to do a really light planing on it because I want to try to keep them as thick as possible, at least an inch, maybe even an 1/8 and 16th or an 1/8 of an inch more. We'll see what we can get this to do. So with the preliminary planing done, I'm going to stack them and let them sit overnight so they can rest and see if there's going to be any more movement if they're full or if they're fully stable. Hopefully they're fully stable. And the next day I'm checking and doesn't feel like anything is really moved. Now if you have well-seasoned wood that's fully acclimatized, you probably have nothing to worry about. It's just this wood has been sitting for a good year, but it's been in my garage, not inside my conditioned housing envelope. And since I had the time, I just left it for a while, so all is good. So the wood for the cross pieces and the wood for the shelf, I still want to plane down more. So I'm going to send that through the planer now to get closer to the finished thickness of 3/4 of an inch that we're aiming for, or close to that. The legs I'm keeping as thick as possible, so they're ready to be cut to size. And the top, yeah, in the plans I've got the top also at 3/4 of an inch, but I like a thicker top. I think that just having a slightly thicker top looks kind of nice. This is almost exactly an inch thick, which I think will look good. So the top is ready to be cut to size also, so we'll put that aside. Planing. Each time through I flip the board so I'm taking an even amount from both sides of the board. Next on the table saw, I'm going to rip the cross pieces to 1.5 inches in width and cut them to length. Much as I love cherry, it's one of those woods that will burn if you even look at it sideways, so let's just take a moment and try to sand that off before I go any further. So I want the legs to be square, so I'm going to set the width just off the piece of wood. And maybe just tap it a smidgen. In my plans, I've got the legs set to be a height of 17.25 inches, but because I'm keeping the top thicker at a full inch thick, I'm going to cut my legs to length now at 17 inches. I cut one extra, but I think they're all looking good, so hopefully I'm not going to need it. So next time I'm sorting them, checking which one how I like the grain orientation. And on the top, I'm going to draw a square so that marks the inside, and it also marks the top. So the legs are going to go together in this orientation. And the next thing I want to do is mark the taper. Now this is the top, so this is the bottom, and the taper has to go on the inside of the bottom. I'm going to taper starting at the 9-inch mark, so that's below where the shelf will be. And then I'll use this, oh, what's this called again? I forget what this is called, saddle square or something? Anyways, I'll use this guide to bring it around the corner so I've got both faces marked. Normally I just freehand my tapers on the bandsaw because I don't do them that often, so I've never made a dedicated tapering jig, but I had an idea and I'm just going to make an ad hoc tapering jig using my big crosscut sled. So on the bottom of the leg I've marked where the taper is going to go, and I've drawn the line showing what needs to be cut off. And I have this clamp marked on a piece of scrap plywood, and I'm simply going to take the leg and I'm going to put it here, and the saw blade cuts right along here, so I'm just lining the pencil mark up there, and then over here I'm bringing that 9-inch mark and I'm lining it right up with the edge of the jig, and let's clamp it in place. Going to need a few fine adjustments. Fine adjustment meaning I hit it with a hammer. And with this in place, take another little scrap of plywood and just line it up at the bottom. And I think I'll clamp it again because I don't want it shifting while I'm screwing it into place. You want to make sure you're not screwing through the bottom. I already had to switch to shorter screws. So I've got my test piece here, and just put that into place and clamp it down, and here we go. Yeah, jammed. Okay, that got a bit exciting. I got a nice taper, except both times the board jammed as it was getting cut off, so I need to have something to catch the cut off. Let me get a scrap of plywood. Okay, long story short, I was doing that backwards. Forget what I said about setting up the jig. I had absent-mindedly set it up so it was going from thick to skinny on the cut, and no matter what I did, when it got to the skinny part, the piece would drop down and catch in the blade and either get thrown or jam. Instead, I now have the jig flipped around so that it's cutting from skinny to thick for the tapered off cut. So on my crosscut sled now I have this stop here, and the angled piece is going that way. So you take your leg where I've got it marked where I want it to be cut off, and that comes against this stop here, gets pushed up against the piece, clamped into place, and now the 9-inch mark is right there. So that's where it's going to start cutting. And so it's going to start with a skinny cut and go to a thicker cut. So on this channel I show my mistakes, and so today I learned when you're doing a taper, you want to go from skinny to thick on the off cut, not the other way around. So on we go. And after I've made one cut on 4 legs, I'm going to turn them, but now the hold down is looser, so I need to, my hold down is a bit manual, so I need to loosen it up and extend the locking knob. And you may have noticed that it is still throwing the offcuts a bit, so I'm standing well clear of this, even though these are pretty small. So I can take the pieces and line up the square on the top. And if I turn it upside down, you can see how they all nicely taper out. Interestingly, there's virtually no burning, so you know, I guess it helps having your piece really tightly held in a jig. And with the cross pieces and the legs, they're going to go like that. So the next step is joinery, and I'm going to be using pocket holes for that. They're quick and simple and strong, but despite their simplicity, I still think it's a good idea to do a quick test joint that I work out in my head how things are going to go together and make sure I don't see any roadblocks. I've put little scribbles on that mark where the screws go. It also tells me what's the inside face of each of the cross pieces, and I also took the time to mark the top for later alignment. I'm going to put 2 pocket holes at the end of each cross piece. So I need to stop and think ahead for a moment, and I'm going to be using these table clips for attaching the top to the base, and so I need to get the slots into the cross pieces now before the table is assembled, because once it's assembled it's going to be too small to fit a tool in there. I'm orienting all the pieces so the top is down, and then I got my biscuit joiner, and I have a piece of plywood which raises it up a bit. I found that in my experimenting. That's what I need to get the right height of the slot. And then I'm just going to put a slot into each of these. And the result is a slot that's just high enough that this is going to put some nice pressure when it's attached. The screws do most of the work, but I still put a little dab of glue. Things are getting tricky now with putting the 2 sides together because there's just not enough room to fit the drill in there. I'll try with the right angle, but I think I might have to might have to be doing this one by hand with a short stubby screwdriver. So yeah, I ended up doing a couple of different techniques. I get in a little ways with that. Then I'm using this using a little socket wrench to get it the rest of the way. So yeah, usually pocket holes are quicker and simpler, but they're not the greatest in tight spaces. Moving on, I'm going to cut the top to size, and this is another one of my situations where I treat plans like guidelines because my legs ended up just a hair bigger than in the plans, so I'm going to make the top just a hair bigger than in the plans. So I'm going with 10 1/4 rather than 10 inches and 18 1/4 in length. The shelf is cut to fit. Just like that, and then I'll have to figure out the length. So I want the shelf to be 4.5 inches below the top, so I've milled up these little spacers to just help me with positioning. And I was going to attach it with just a little pocket hole, which should be enough. It's just a small shelf, but then I had those issues earlier with attaching the pocket hole, so what I've done is I've marked where the leg is on the board. And instead of the big pocket hole jig, I've got just the little portable jig. And what I've practiced doing is I practiced on this piece where I would hold it at a bit of an angle so that I should hopefully be able to get at the screw and fasten it into place. So I'm going to, here's the pencil mark from the leg. I'm going to line this up. I'm going to turn it like this, clamp it into place, and cross your fingers. Worst comes to worst, I'm using the ratchet again. And we have an angled hole. So then I'm going to repeat that for all the other 4 holes. I'm just putting 1 screw at each corner. And now, let's see. Now I can miss the leg when I'm putting the screw in. Problem solved. Now for attaching the clips, I'm going to need the right angle drill again just to be able to get in there. Using 3/4 inch screws here. And I might as well take a moment right now to put a label on the bottom of it. I use the toner transfer method with acetone and a laser printer. Now let's see, how is it? Oh yeah, there's maybe a little wiggle, but took a little bit of sanding, but now it's pretty level. But I will take a moment to chamfer the bottom of the legs. And I'll just do that with a block plane, and I just do like 4 strokes per corner. And now here's some epic slow-mo of me sanding, because somehow my camera got switched into super slow-mo mode, which, you know, ruined like the next 5 clips. I was trying to explain that I had sanded the piece to 220, and then I was going to now apply my favorite polyurethane, which is this oil-modified water-based polyurethane from Minwax, which I use a lot. This is going to get glasses and things on it, so I really want the protection of a polyurethane. As usual with polyurethane, you give it a light sanding in between each coat. Probably going to do 4 coats on the top, but 3 coats on everything else. So there we go. 1 board, 1 weekend, and we got a quick and simple little build that I think is still a classic and elegant looking little table. Not gonna lie, I was worried that the legs were just gonna be too small when I was building it. It looked right in the plans, but when I was just holding the wood in my hands, it's like it's only an inch. But in the end, I think it's really quite, it fits the proportions of the piece. And you know, the tapers, they're almost hard to see, but they just add a little delicacy to it. I think it really works. I'm not sure how practically useful this shelf is, but I just really like it. I think it really adds to the look. It certainly added to the complexity, because it made attaching the top that much more challenging. And I had to come up with this angled pocket hole for attaching it, but I'm really glad I put it in there. So why did I build such a small table? Well, I designed it for our living room. It's going to go beside an easy chair, something like this. Yes, it's small. It's just a place where you can put a cup or a book or something. Doesn't take up a lot of space. One thing I did with this project that I've never done before is I rigorously tracked my hours, and I may never do it again because it was a bit of a pain in the neck. But I figured that, I'm positioning this as a quick weekend sort of project, so it would be helpful if I could defend that by tracking my hours. So when I walked into the shop, I wrote the time down. When I walked out, I wrote the time down. And the grand total is 7 hours and 20 minutes. Now bear in mind, that involves filming, moving lights, changing camera angles, and reshooting when I stumble over my lines. This is like the 3rd or 4th time that I'm redoing this scene right now, for instance. So yeah, I think an experienced person could probably expect to build this table in about 5 hours. So I wouldn't call it a 1-day build, because you have to allow time for glue to dry, or I allowed the boards to rest after the initial planing, and of course time between finishing. But you could certainly do this in a weekend. I started this Thursday night. I didn't do anything Friday night, and it's now Sunday early afternoon, and it's done. So there you go. 5-hour build, 7-hour build. And it was also kind of fun to build a project from just 1 board. And here's all the leftover wood spread out on this bench that's left over from that 1 board. And just as a reminder, that board was about 9.5 feet long, 12 inches wide, so 9.5 board feet. So figure out the cost of lumber in your area, and you'll know roughly what it would cost you to build this project. And if you would like to build this table, you can probably figure it out from the video, but I do have a set of plans available that should help. I've collected together a parts list, exploded diagram, measure drawings with all the dimensions, 2D layouts, Just, you know, it's meant to be a companion to this build video. You can find links to that and to many other plans that I built in the video description down below. But otherwise, that's it for this one. We'll see you on the next one.